delighted to be joined on this edition of Sourcing TV by Donna Kelly. Donna's got two titles, and hopefully I'll get these correct. You're a Senior Vice President Business Unit Lead for South Midlands with CGI, but also you are Chair of CGI's DEI Working Group.
That's correct.
Yeah, it's correct, and you have been for the last 3 years. So I'm really delighted that you've joined us today, because actually, your work chairing the DEI working group actually won CGI GSA's award for Diversity and Inclusion Programme of the Year towards the end of last year. So very big congratulations on that. And I'm so delighted that you are willing to sort of like share the best practices that CGI has been working on and put in place over the last few years, because this is so important for all the other service providers and also all of our enterprise buyers to really understand what a good DEI program looks like, so that the whole industry improves. So we really are very appreciative of you sharing. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions about the programme you've got in place at CGI. How did it start, and how did it start off, and who was involved in it?
Okay, so firstly, I'd just like to say thanks very much, Kerry, for the opportunity, and thank you to you and also the GSA for the award as well. It was an absolute privilege to win, and a testament to all the hard work that the team have put in. So yeah, we're very grateful for that. So thank you. So kind of how did it all begin? I guess if I kind of rewind about 7 years, I think. So I'm going to go back about 7 years into the history of networks and DE&I. And I think we started with 2 primary networks. So there was a women's network, and then we had an LGBT plus network, but they didn't really add too much value other than it was a good source for women to get together. But it was often people would mimic it and take the mickey, and is it a group for women to get together and just do some knitting and things like that. And I think every woman that's ever been part of a women's network years ago would probably recognise that. But we knew that there was a place for networks, absolutely, primarily to be a safe space for individuals from different diverse backgrounds and groups to get together and share their experiences and support each other. And the second reason really was, and I think this is probably the most important thing when it comes to DE&I and the networks, is for them to educate others. So that was kind of how we sort of started. A couple of things that's really important for us and a priority is that the networks are created by our members. CGI calls it staff members, that our members have an affinity with that particular network. So it's not just a case of, oh, I know I've got a good idea and I'm going to create a network and champion the cause, because that doesn't really add the authenticity that I think networks require. Our networks are all voluntary run, so it's no one's full-time job to do DE&I. The principle around that, our belief is, if it becomes 1 or 2 or 3 people's job, then everyone can point a finger and say, what are you doing about it? Rather than actually it's everybody's job to do something about diversity, equity and inclusion. So that was a really important key factor as well. So anyone that wanted to create a network, and we exclude politics, is pretty much off the radar, but anything else is in, sets up a group of like-minded individuals. They can rally around through our newsletters to get other people onboarded. And then there are some principles around the network. So the first principle would be, what are the aims and the goals of the network? So what is it that they want to try to achieve throughout the year? The second is, how are they going to go about educating others for their particular group and their particular network? And then the third one, which is, it's probably minor, but it's about making sure that there's a continuation. So any network leads and committees need to have 18 months in post, and then that there's a community of individuals that follow on. And that ensures that, people don't get too entrenched in it, too militant with the network. And actually what we're doing is we're bringing fresh and new ideas in. So they're really the kind of principles. So we started off, I would say, with 4 main headings. So the Women's Network, LGBT+, BAME Network and the Disability Network. And then what we found was that there was quite a lot of breakaway groups, so smaller groups of individuals that didn't necessarily want to be part of the women's network. And I'll give you an example of the menopause group. So we had a group of women that said, in our own right, we need a safe place where we can talk and share experiences, best ways of working. But actually, we want to educate others as to what it's like certainly in the workplace to be going through the menopause. And that particular group on its own, we recently did a know-how, and know-hows are 30-minute, 40-minute sections of communication that we do during a lunchtime. We put it into everybody's calendar. Anybody can attend if they want to, or they can ignore it if it's of no interest to them. And that particular know-how that we did was attended by, I would say, 70% more men than it was women. And I thought that was really interesting. So that's really the part that allies play in the network as well. And it was men that have got mothers, sisters, wives, etc., that just wanted to learn a little bit more about it. So I think the value of the education is definitely evidenced in that example alone. So we started to develop these additional capability groups. We've got a parental network. We have a network for young professionals. So these are young professionals into the business. That's one of the newest networks we have, and it's a really exciting one because we hadn't really thought about it before, or the need to have it. But since the pandemic, when we find that most people are now working in a kind of hybrid world where you're not going into the office and you haven't got that physical face-to-face contact, networking opportunities, learning general social skills, that these guys really do need somewhere that they can feel a party to and a part of. So those guys specifically do actually host quite a lot of face-to-face events so that people can get together. So in total, we've got 14 networks now that are all absolutely there and thriving and doing great. So yeah, a complete transformation over the years, and very successfully done.
Excellent. So how many of CGI's members are actually involved in a network?
It's hard to say. It's hard to give you an exact number. The largest of our networks is our women's network, and I would say probably about 75% of all of our females are actually part of the network.
Wow.
So get regular communications and get involved in different events and engagements. The reason I say it's a hard number because it's the number of allies that participate as well. So you can't necessarily sort of put a number or a measure or a target. The other thing, people can come in and go out. So it might not necessarily be for them long term, but it may be there for them just to support them for a particular period of time. We have one of our networks is actually a bereavement network. And again, that's sort of fairly new. That's been running probably for about 18 months now. And this come about because one of our members, one of our senior members actually lost her brother, and said that how difficult it was to return to the workplace and have people approach her not knowing whether to say something or to say something, how she was going to react, whether she needed to give them a precursor that says, look, I'm still a bit fragile, so please do or don't today talk about my brother. And then what we realised was actually it's a much wider challenge for people than anyone had sort of expected or experienced. So for something like that, people can enter into the network, get what they need out of it in a point of time, but then of course they could leave at any time they like.
Yeah. So obviously that gives a very clear example of what the benefit of one of the networks could be. I wonder if you can share some, I don't know if you've got some top level stats or maybe some anecdotal stories of, the benefits of having these networks in place.
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting when you say about stats. So we're quite careful that we don't necessarily set specific targets in terms of percentages. So you could say, right, okay, we want 50% of our employees to be female, right? And then that's it, we're done. Are we done? What happens when we get to 51? Does that mean we've gone too far and we need to get more men in? So, but what we do is we take a lot of statistical and data information about the representation of different groups, ethnicities, sexuality, etc. But all we need to do with it really is just shine a spotlight on it. So that makes us kind of look at the number, think about it. I mean, we publish gender pay gap, we publish ethnicity pay gap. So those kind of things obviously are there and in the public domain. But in respect of, statistical information, it's more for us about shining the spotlight. What is our representation of managers in the company from an ethnicity background, for example? And it may be, just say, for example, it's 20%. Is 20% good enough? What do we need to do to increase that? But I think more importantly, it's about working with the network to see how they feel they're represented. Do they have enough role models? Is that something that they find is lacking? And then how can we target and work with the networks to make sure that their representation of their particular diversity is increased? So it could be working in geographic locations to do more recruitment for certain areas. It could be more branding and marketing in others. So for Pride, for example, we brand ourselves as being unconditionally inclusive. So for Pride events, welcoming and ensuring that everybody recognises that CGI is a safe place to work, no matter what diverse background you come from, is really the focus of the things that we try to achieve.
So that kind of leads on to another question then, is how are these networks resourced? Do the individuals have to volunteer and do fundraising, and how does that happen?
Okay, so yes, they have to volunteer. So it's a side of the desk job, but people that typically tend to put themselves forward are very passionate about the topic. And so therefore it's not, it's a chore. And if it does become a chore, then you can always hand it over and pass it over to somebody else. In respect of funding, so CGI has an overall DE&I budget. And then what we do is we work with the individual groups at the beginning of each financial year. And part of their kind of goal and their mission for the year is, what are the things that you want to achieve this year? And then we work out what budget is required for each of the networks. And then the budget's held centrally, and as events take place, then obviously things get funded and paid for. We think it's really important. It's probably a wiser spend of money than it would be to employ one or two people, put it that way.
Yeah. So can you just as we start moving towards a wrap up, can you give us some examples of what an objective might have been and the deliverables, just to bring it to life?
Let me just try it. I'm just trying to think of a good example. So a good example probably of a measure, and it's an interesting one actually. It's probably about reducing sensationalism. So it's about the amount of work potentially that was delivered by our HR departments to resolve conflicts and grievances, and it's very evident that a lot of people previously, before they had the support of networks, felt very isolated in a challenging situation and didn't really have anywhere to go. And so their only course of action was to raise a dispute, raise a grievance, raise a complaint about somebody or a particular situation. And I think since then, now that individual has a network to go to discuss the situation that they found themselves in. And I call it kind of knocking out, sensationalism, but really it's mostly, when those situations occur, they're not done through malice. They're mostly done through lack of education. People may use the wrong terminology, or people may have, I hate the expression, but it was just banter. But that kind of banter has an impact on somebody and can, affect somebody's well-being and someone's feelings. And so through sort of desensationalizing the situation and helping with that, do you know how you made that person feel conversation, actually has probably reduced an awful lot of, I would say, HR grievance and cases that previously would have been in place before.
All right, so some real top line sort of
absolutely
benefits from the whole program. So if you were to give some words of advice to anybody out there that hasn't really got a good DEI program in place, what would your words of advice be on how to set it up?
I think learn from others. It's a bit of a tried and test. We're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and I don't think anybody is. We've got a long way to go. But learn from others. Don't just start with a blank piece of paper and think, okay, this is what I think we need. Go and speak to other organisations. And one of the things that we try to do at CGI with our clients is taking the business to one side. Let's talk about how our programs are operating and how their programs are operating and what we can learn from each other. So I think that I would say my best piece of advice is just, reach out to me, reach out to CGI, but reach out to other organisations and take the best from them.
Yeah, very good advice. And my very last question for you, Donna, then is you said, you're not by any means perfect, you're on a journey. What's the next stage for you on your journey at CGI with DEI?
I think our next stage is about probably increasing the representation that we have in certain groups and certain areas. I think what perfect would look like would be having no need for DEI, because we're all in that unbiased world and we've all completed our training and we've all got self-awareness of our biases as they exist. All of our representation and statistics are absolutely perfect, based on geography. I think just being able to be authentic, what good looks like to me is that everybody feels comfortable to be their authentic self and to be able to bring their whole self to work without any fear or concern. I was recently at a conference, and the question that was asked was, has anybody in the room had to lie in their career or in their workplace for whatever reason? And there wasn't one person in the room that didn't put their hand up. And I thought that was a really interesting, mine was when my children were very young, I actually lied about their ages because I thought they were too young, for me to get a managerial position. And so therefore I upped their ages a bit and made them a bit older, because if they were a bit older, then they're less likely to get measles and chickenpox and things like that. Everybody in the room had one or two things they had to lie about to get promoted, to get the job, to get the career that they wanted. I think that's a really sad existence. Yeah. So to expel that, to remove that, would be a perfect world for me.
That is a great nirvana to have, absolutely.
Yes.
So, thank you so much for joining us today, Donna, and we look forward to seeing how the journey progresses. And thank you so much for being, an ambassador for best practice and sharing your best practice.
Oh, my absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you.